So, in the times we live in today, plausible deniability is just not a thing. When somebody is speaking about a form of discrimination they've experienced or witnessed, even if you had nothing to do with it, but especially if you did, please do not say, "I didn't know." This can actually seem like a form of gaslighting. We all want to be believed for our lived experiences, and we do not want to be questioned about what we see, hear, or endure. And interestingly, the same not knowing can apply to positive stories. So this is something I've learned in 6 years of conducting Brave Sis Project and uplifting stories of little known sheroes of color in US and world history. You know, I used to think it was cool when people were like really surprised and excited or stunned or even annoyed that they hadn't heard of this woman or that woman. Wait, why have I never heard that name? Why was this left out of every textbook I ever touched? But then after a while, it starts to become like, well, isn't it time by now that you make it a little bit your business to learn and know? You know, I was recently talking to a fellow alum from the elite New York City girls' school we attended decades ago. And we were talking about some of these holes in our so-called extraordinary feminist education. And mainly these holes were stories regarding women of color. I guess our education wasn't that top-notch after all, I joked. But the reality is that until the past decade or so, and that is putting aside today's evil backlash and foolish efforts to erase history, up until recently, the stories of non-white heroics went largely unknown. We could all refer to the Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech, but Frederick Douglass's 4th of July speech was less known. And even less known was Sojourner Truth's address at the 1851 Women's Rights Convention, popularly known as the Ain't I a Woman speech, and widely regarded as one of the most important speeches in both abolitionist and women's rights history. In this speech, Truth exposed the intertwined racism and sexism Black women faced. She challenged biblical justifications for women's subordination, and she helped turn a hostile convention into one that was in favor of women's rights. And while her words have become a foundational text for thinking about what we now call intersectionality, it's important to state that she most likely did not use the word ain't. This title was appended to her speech in an 1863 rewritten version of this speech by Frances Dana Barker Gage, a white American social reformer writer and activist who puts fake Southern dialect into Sojourner's mouth. Sojourner's first language was actually Dutch, and she spoke a very beautiful and erudite English. So there's an example where you might be right in saying, I had no idea. And I think it's really too bad, you know, even the abolitionists were caught up in the racial stereotypes of their day. And this is why I always remind folks to dig deeper in their solidarity and trust building moves. And this is why performativism is not enough by any standard. And while we're at it, let's also mention Maria W. Stewart, a free Black woman born in 1803 in Hartford, Connecticut, who was the first American woman to speak publicly to mixed audiences about slavery and Black women's rights, challenging both racism and sexism and inspiring other Black women abolitionists. One of her famous speeches was called "Why Sit Ye Here and Die?", given on September 21st, 1832 at Franklin Hall in Boston. In this speech, she urged free Black people in the North, especially Black women, to take their destiny into their own hands. She exhorted them not to accept racism, poverty, and blocked access to education, and to reject the inevitability of domestic and menial labor. And she also exposed white prejudice and called on Black men and women to pursue moral, intellectual, and economic uplift by actively pleading our cause rather than relying on passive suffering. In urging Black women to claim intellectual and political authority, she was one of the first, but she was not the only. Nearly a century later in New York, Chinese-American suffragist Mabel Ping Hua Lee delivered major public speeches on women's suffrage. including a 1914 address at a rally and church forum, where she argued that women's political equality was essential to true democracy and explicitly linked U.S. suffrage to Chinese women's enfranchisement after the 1911 revolution. And there are so many others across the racial spectrum who made history in their day. But yet their stories, the ones that we most often hear, are typically the Elizabeth Cady Stantons, the Susan B. Anthonys, the Alice Pauls. All important, but take note, all white. And at this point, where information is so readily at our fingertips, choosing not to know or not bothering to find out about the Black, Brown, Asian, and Indigenous women who shaped the world isn't really innocent oversight. Some might go as far to say it's complicity. Choosing not to know keeps vital role models hidden, erases living proof of resistance and brilliance, and perpetuates the false idea that people who look a certain way are always automatically the ones in charge or who matter. That restrictive mindset ripples out generation after generation, limiting what we believe is possible, even controlling who gets to be seen as fully heroic or even human. So I want to say this. Not knowing isn't harmless, and it isn't neutral. If you're not actively trying to know, you're reinforcing an oppressive status quo. So are you committed to breaking that cycle, or are you comfortable letting it roll on by? I will share just a few names from my own book and research to inspire you to learn more. So like, who's missing from your stories? Here's a little sample of the brilliance that's our school book histories maybe skipped. Mary McLeod Bethune. She wasn't just an educator, she was an institution builder. Born to parents who had been enslaved, she advised presidents. She founded Bethune-Cookman University, and she led the charge for civil rights and Black women's organizing in ways that literally changed American society. What about Grace Lee Boggs, a Chinese-American philosopher activist who refused to stay in any lane? For over 70 years, she fought for Black liberation, labor rights, and genuinely radical social transformation in Detroit and beyond. She proved that Asian-Black collaboration and solidarity is a necessary force in the evolution of justice. Or Pura Belpré, New York's first Puerto Rican librarian, a writer, folklorist, and puppeteer who laid foundations for bilingual literature and made generations of Latino kids see themselves reflected on the library shelf and beyond. Or Buffalo Calf Road Woman, a Northern Cheyenne warrior who literally turned the tide at the Battle of the Rosebud and fought at the legendary Battle of Little Bighorn. She challenges every stereotype about who can be a hero in American history. Or Gwendolyn Brooks, who's much more than poetry's first Black Pulitzer Prize winner. Her words expose the struggles and heart of Black communities, and she spent her life empowering young writers to seize space for themselves on and off the page. Or Suru Aoki, who broke barriers for Japanese and Asian actresses in early American films at a time when anti-Asian hatred and exclusion was open, legal, and brutal. Her screen roles made waves in Hollywood, but her real legacy was providing Asian American women with a face and voice in a hostile industry. Or Ada Blackjack, who survived years as a castaway in the Arctic, enduring what most people cannot imagine, and yet she came out alive, pushing the limits of resilience, skill, and willpower as an Inupiat woman from Alaska. These people are not extras to the main story, they are the story. Imagine what kind of world we would have if we taught this truth, if every girl or any child could point to role models who looked like them, who broke the mold, and who survived and thrived.